Yeah. Tonight, we're going to test your pulse and see if he can keep up with the beat of Corcoran Holt. He is here tonight to give us some hardcore bebop, swing, Latin, groove, and go-go. This is B-Side. I'm your host, Kenyatta Beasley, and we're going to get right into it with Mr. Corcoran Holt and the A-Team. So, Corcoran, before I introduce you in the band, tell me a bit about that first song that you played.
Yes, I actually wrote that first song for my beautiful wife, Raven G. Holt, who happens to be right here in the front row.
Hello, Raven. Yeah. And you guys are new parents.
Yes.
So, I mean, the new addition, how is that? How are you adjusting?
I'm adjusting every day, man. It's a beautiful experience. He's 8 months old now.
Right.
And
what's his name?
Art Mackay Holt.
Right. Cool.
Yes, he's
said like a proud father.
Yeah, I'm so proud. It's just amazing looking down at somebody and seeing a splitting image of myself and my wife at the same time. And he has our personalities, and he's inspiring me in so many different ways.
All right. So that song was written for Raven. Hi,
yes,
Raven.
for Raven.
And so it was what was the name of the song?
Raven's Wing.
Oh,
Raven's Wing. Yes, and that bass line I actually came up with the first time I met her, almost 13 years ago. We were hanging out for the first time. I so happened to have my bass with me, and I played.
And you wrote that song on the spot.
And well, not the whole song. the song took some years to come together, but but I had to learn her personality, and that song is all about her personality, being in a nice groove, a nice African sort of feel.
Right. So you got because you actually started off
on djembe,
right,
which was my first instrument, by the way.
Really?
So I like to play to get warmed up on that, get myself centered. Then I moved to the bass, and basically that whole vibe was her personality. We're here at this easy space, this easy place, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you have this fiery trumpet solo, that just comes up, and the tempo goes triple time where we were, and it's very exciting, and that's how we live. That's our daily life, and then we go through these different motions and these different feelings, and then all of a sudden there's an open bass solo, and I try to bring things back to where we started, with her help, by the way. Right. But the whole song as a whole is a very beautiful experience. It's never boring. It's very, very beautiful yet intense and mellow at the same time.
Well, when I walked in, I realized most of the guys that were playing with you, and by alternate name, you could have called this Corcoran Holt and the A-Team.
Oh, hey, definitely.
So at this time, man, can you take a moment to introduce, this fantastic lineup of musicians, man?
Yes. Well, on drums, I have one of my brothers, McClinty Mac Hunter.
Yeah.
On drums, McClinty Hunter Jr. And we used to play together a lot in D.C. before we moved here to New York. So I've known him for many years. On trumpet, Mr. Josh Evans.
Yeah.
And we met many years ago also, while I was still in Washington.
Really?
He was in town doing the Betty Carter Straight Ahead program.
Jazz
Ahead program. Yeah. And then next to him is the magnificent Mr. Stacy Dillard, great friend of mine, and always inspiring from the first moment I stepped in New York. He was one of the first saxophone players that I heard on the scene, and we became very close. We were actually housemates for a few years here in Brooklyn.
And you guys still like each other?
Yeah, we cool, man. Now, we like family. That's my main man,
I'm not trying to air dirty laundry.
No. We're cool, we're cool. We always will be. And on piano, keyboards today, Mr. Benito Gonzalez.
Yeah.
We met years ago in Washington also.
So it seems as if everything is going back to D.C.
Yes.
So you're a D.C. native, and your first instrument was the djembe.
That's right. So
why the djembe? I mean, even though like D.C. is like a cultural hub of rhythm,
yes,
all within itself, man.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's how you.
Well, my father actually, and both of my parents, they wanted to get us in, me and my sister, into something creative when we were very young. And there was a thriving Afrocentric community in D.C. during that time. So there was a dance company called Wose Dance Company, which is West African percussion and dance. And my father took me to this class, and I was just blown away. I was just sitting there staring at the drums and just, you know, fascinated. And the drum teacher actually came up to me and handed me some sticks and asked me to play a rhythm on the dun-dun and the samba drums, which was another form of West African percussion. And I played the rhythm correctly, and I was about 4, and he was like, "Oh man, you're gonna be in the class." So then from that point on, I started playing djembe, and I fell in love with the culture and the community in Washington, and man, I've been doing it ever since. I was very serious about drumming all the way until I started playing bass when I was 10 years old.
So, tell me about the culture in D.C. coming up, man. How did that affect you? I mean, you know, being at that time, it was definitely known as Chocolate City.
Definitely.
I mean, and it was all these go-go and all these different influences. So, I mean, so how did that affect you as a young man coming up as a musician in Washington?
It kept me busy. It kept me busy. It kept me out of trouble, and it kept me focused. And I knew it allowed me to know what I wanted to do from a very young age. So from the age of 4 or 5, I knew that I wanted to be a musician. And there was so much happening around, you know. When I ended up going into the DC Youth Orchestra program to play bass, I actually wanted to play drums, percussion, but there weren't any available spots there. So my father said, "I'm gonna sign you up on bass because the bass is like the drums. The bass and the drums go hand in hand."
Right.
And my great-grandfather was a jazz bassist in North Carolina who lived next door to John Coltrane when he was a child.
Okay.
So my father thought it would be cool for me to try to play the bass. And I took the bass home, and I thought it was just gonna be great, and it was very hard to play at first. And then eventually once I got to Duke Ellington School of the Arts, I was around all these great bass players that are here in New York City now. Amin Salim, Ben Williams, Eric Wheeler. You know, we were all very close. Rashawn Carter, all from DC, and all these guys are here in New York now. And so I was really inspired and influenced. We inspired each other. Right. And it was just fun, man. It was just always fun. We were always learning from each other. We had elders in the jazz community there, such as Keter Betts, Steve Novosel, Butch Warren, you know, all of these legacy, these great bass players. Yeah, the DC legends. So they would come in and work with us. We would watch them play, and there's just a lot of different clubs and a lot of experiences, and we were always constantly pushing each other.
Cool. You know what I want to do? I want to talk more about your DC upbringing, but more often than not, people rather hear you play than.
Let's do it. Yeah, most definitely.
So can you set up the next 2 songs for us?
Sure. Yeah. The next song we're going to play is from my record titled The Mecca, which is in the record, and this tune is called Brother Cork, and it's written by a good friend of mine named Sharp Radway, great pianist here, and he wrote this tune basically for me, this melody for me, because I love these changes so much. And then after that, we're going to play a tune that I wrote for Stacy titled Another Groove.
Awesome. Once again, Corcoran Holt and the A-Team. So Corcoran, man, you're a graduate of the Duke Ellington School of the Arts. How was that experience? Because that's one of the preeminent high schools for talented musicians. So how was your time at Duke Ellington?
That was actually one of the most special times of my entire life, educationally and culturally. Going into that school and being around so much talent in one place at a very young age.
And Davy Yarborough, right?
Davy Yarborough, my mentor. He's the head of the department there. Carolyn Kellogg was the bass instructor there, who taught so many bass players, going all the way back to Michelle and Degio cello, who also went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts.
Well, because, man, when I first met you, I think I met you, I met Ben Williams, I met Eric Wheeler, man, it's Chris Fun, and like a bunch of guys, Amin Salim.
Yeah.
Man, what was it how did DC become this bass playing like mill?
I think, honestly, it started with the DC Youth Orchestra program because we were all in the DC Youth Orchestra program when we were little, from age 10, and then we all went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts at the same time. Amin was there before I was there. He was a senior when I was a freshman. Me and Eric were the same age, so we were there. And then you got this little bass player coming in underneath us, who's 2 years younger than us, Ben Williams. So and then, like I was saying earlier, you had Keita Betts and Steve Novosel and Butch Warren, so you had this history of bass players.
Right.
And then with go-go music, I think we're very heavy into drum and bass. So that's like our importance in how we play is very bass heavy. And it was always like we were at different levels. And so I was always learning from Amin. I was always learning from Eric. Then I was always learning from Ben, and we were always learning from each other. And we were so close in age. So we would hang in school, and then on the weekends we would be at orchestra on Saturdays. So it was kind of like this.
Brothers.
it was just this brotherhood. So it was never a thing where we were competing with one another.
Right.
We were just more so kind of checking out what we were doing.
Right.
And I was like, man, I need to be better. You know, I want to be in that spot in the jazz ensemble. You know,
Right.
so what do I need to do to get
Right.
what I need to do to get there?
Right, so the
You
thing
know,
is,
so it's
all,
just
all,
supporting each
all of
other.
you guys got to D.C. at the same time,
time, same
roughly the same
generation.
time. So how, between Duke Ellington and, well, I guess since we're on B-side, Brooklyn,
Right.
what was your journey between D.C. to Brooklyn?
I would always watch movies when I was a kid, and then I would always be in the history and in jazz, jazz history, and all the greats were here in New York City.
Right.
So I knew that when the time came after high school and after college that I needed to spend some time in New York. And I would oftentimes, at Blues Alley in Washington, D.C., there would be these different bands that would come in. You know, that's the main club in D.C., so you would have Branford Marsalis come down. You have Wynton, you have Kenny Garrett come down, and,
Right.
and so there were just a lot, Curtis Fuller, and just the older generation to the younger generation. And I always said, I want to push myself, so I need to go to New York to experience this. I want to be an adult, and I want to be grown, and I want to develop. And this is, if I'm comfortable here in Washington, I'm so young, I need to make that transition to New York to meet all of these great younger musicians, and also to seek out the legends and try to play with them and try to learn as much as I can while they're still here. So that's what made me really come here.
Well, I mean, during your time in New
Information.
York, you seem to work, I've seen you work with pretty much everyone, you know, from in jazz, from the jazz annals of history. I've seen you with Curtis Fuller, Kenny Garrett, the who's who of jazz. At what point did you decide, I need to just do a recording myself and step out and be a leader?
After, I think over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, once I got married, and I knew that I was I was transitioning into truly being a grown man. And I could have done a record 10 years ago,
Right.
but I needed to have these experiences so I could put it into the record. You know, that's what my whole record is all about. The time coming from Washington to New York City. And it's been 13 years being here, so I just knew that I wanted to put out something that I could listen to a few years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and be like, man, that's a nice first record. That's a nice first recording. I wanted to be proud of it. I didn't just want to just put out something just for the sake of putting it out. You know, and I was learning so much, playing with all of these different folks, and I was just getting all of this guidance. And then I knew once I got married and I was grown, and I knew I needed to have something to call my own.
So all these songs are basically a collection of your experiences between D.C.
That's right.
and New York City and Brooklyn.
That's right.
So set up, this will be a second to last song.
Okay.
Set this one up, and what is this called, and what's the story behind it?
The story behind this song here is titled 14th Street Bounce. Okay. I wrote this tune actually while I was in Washington, you know, and it's dedicated to the street that I grew up on in Washington, 14th Street Northwest, where all the jazz clubs on U Street corridor. I'm not sure if you've been to Bohemian Caverns that used to be there.
I have been to D.C.
Yeah.
I've been.
Okay. So this is about traveling up from U Street all the way up to my mother's house, where she lives in Uptown Washington, D.C.
Dope.
And this is a tune dedicated to Washington, D.C. and dedicated to 14th Street. So this is 14th
Once
Street
again, Corcoran Holt, the A-Team, and 14th Street Bounce.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Corcoran, for sharing your rhythms with us tonight. Be sure to keep up with Corcoran Holt on Instagram and Twitter at Corcoran Holt and at CorcoranHolt.com. I'm Kenyatta Beasley, and I hope that you had a spectacular time with us tonight. Make sure that you stop by our BRIC House TV studio every Thursday to hear more of the best music that Brooklyn has to offer. You can also check out tonight's installment and past episodes anytime at youtube.com/BRIC TV, or check out our BRIC Radio podcast of this episode at soundcloud.com/BRIC Radio. All right, Corcoran and the A-Team, please take us out with one more song right after this.